Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Sharat, and I'm the host and moderator for today's webinar. Caleb from BlockApps will be managing the chat. Feel free to chip in to ask your questions in the chat window. We'll wait for some time for others to join in. And let me begin by reflecting on how our lives and world order has been disrupted by a global pandemic. None of us have lived through a time like this in living memory. I mean, these are unprecedented times, and the entire world is in a lockdown mode. More than 140 countries are in a lockdown mode to combat this COVID-19 outbreak. Of all systems, healthcare systems are bearing the most of the brunt of this pandemic, and technology is being used as an enabler to fight this pandemic. Now, recently, even the World Health Organization announced that they will be launching a blockchain-based data sharing platform to enable early detection of COVID-19 carriers and infection hotspots. So while the race is still on to come up with a vaccine against the virus, it makes me wonder if blockchain can reduce the time to market for drugs, how it can make clinical trials efficient and speed up the medical credentialing processes so that more providers can join it and fight against this pandemic. To discuss more on this, I have Craig from BlockApps. So Craig leads business development for the healthcare vertical. Welcome, Craig, to the webinar. And I would love to hear your thoughts and perspective on how blockchain can redefine the current healthcare landscape and how we can take this challenge head on. So over to you, Craig. It's all yours now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharat. Again, by way of introduction, I'm Craig Recatto. I head up healthcare and life sciences at BlockApps. Much of which Sharat had spoken about, we're going to discuss in today's presentation. So I want to say again, welcome to everyone, wherever in the world you are joining us. We're living in challenging and unprecedented times. And the hope is that this presentation and this discussion we're going to have today will better your understanding of what's going on and how we feel a blockchain solution can help in the process. So I'd like to go ahead and get started here. By way of an agenda with this presentation today, and we'll have plenty of time during the presentation. As you know, go ahead and ask questions through the chat function. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have time, but we're going to do a general blockchain overview. This is going to be very brief, only a few moments. When we have something like this with people with varying levels of understanding or experience, it's nice just to have a little primer in the beginning. And as Sharat had mentioned, we're going to talk about clinical trials and medical credentialing. And in the middle of the talk, we're going to talk about identity management, a concept that ties the two together and why it's so important to a blockchain-based solution. So at this point, I'm going to move forward into the blockchain overview part. So to get started, what is blockchain? So many of you may already know, but just to get everyone on the same page, it's a decentralized database that stores information as blocks of data. And as you add new data, the chain gets longer, hence the name blockchain. If you look at the graphic there, currently many systems are centralized. There's a server or computer and everyone accesses that. A decentralized system, you don't have that central repository. The data resides with all of the people, all of the users in the system. So it's decentralized. It's important to know that blockchains, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, can be either public or private in general. And overriding key factor take home from this is that the stored data is immutable. When you create the blockchain, you can add to a blockchain, but you can never change the existing data or delete it. And that's a central tenet that will go throughout this, and it's a key strength of a blockchain solution. Single source of truth, you'll hear people use that term, and it really just means that in a decentralized system, everybody has access at the same time to the most recent data. So it's not that some people are not updated and some people are. If you think of it as a centralized thing, it's possible that certain people have the most recent data and other people don't. So single source of truth is very important. And finally, the concept of smart contracts. And think of these as governance rules, like who has access to the network and things like that. And when we want to build in capabilities into a blockchain-based solution, we do it via smart contracts. It's essentially programming what we want the system to do. And we'll talk in a second about enterprise systems, but really what we want to get out of this is a blockchain-based and enterprise platform does address this kind of lack of trust and visibility, data validation, very important, that these centralized current systems exhibit. The next slide here, I want to talk a little bit, not too much, but about public versus enterprise or private blockchains. And many of you know here, a public blockchain, an example is Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency. That's a public blockchain. The activity is visible to everyone. It's such a big system with a lot of transaction that network latency, or the speed of the system, suffers much more than in a private blockchain, where you determine who has access to it, who the members are, and you know who they are. The system is much speedier. And just to let everyone know, at BlockApps, the founders of the company I work for were instrumental in converting kind of a public blockchain into an enterprise or a permission private type network that can be used in businesses. So we have a lot of experience in this area. I also want to just touch on the concept of use cases. You'll hear us talk about this. You hear people talk about it when you're in an emerging technology arena, where you take a situation and you analyze it and you say, hey, what are the pain points? And you develop a blockchain-based solution to address those. It's really just a top-down analysis of a problem and proposing a solution. When you talk about use cases in blockchain, we typically want it to be innovative and practical. It has to be scalable and expandable. It has to be better than what's out there right now. And we tend to do these modularly so we can grow and build on top of them. And just by way of example, you'll see here blockchain. There's a slide. In the healthcare arena, these are our use cases. And you'll see things like clinical trials management, supply chain track and trace, and some other areas. So it's a way for people to describe this. And the added benefit today is that we'll talk about success stories. Many people have use cases and have analyzed the problem, but few have actually built solutions based on a blockchain platform. And it's something that we have done at BlockApps numerous times. So we have experience in actually taking theory into practice. And I'll mention it several times during the talk, but you can visit us on blockapps.net/healthcare. We have detailed information on these use cases and stories, and there's a way to contact me there. Lots of information, so I urge everyone at some point to go and visit us on the web.
Craig, would you suggest that enterprise blockchains are more suited for healthcare sector vis-a-vis a public DLT? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and in general, I want to keep this at a very general level, not knowing the level of experience, but yes, a private permission network is ideal for healthcare because of the privacy security concerns. There are situations, digital wearables and things like that, but for the basis of this presentation, the take home is that these are private permission networks. It's not that everybody can come in and see that data. You choose through governance rules, through the use of smart contracts, who is part of the network and who has access to the information. And if everyone will just bear with me right now, I'm trying to advance to the next slide.
Craig, we have our first question coming in from Marquis Allen. Is wondering if BlockApps is currently working with any pharma companies to explore their blockchain uses in their supply chain.
It's a good question. Thank you, Marquis, for asking it. What I can say is at this point, we are working with several companies. We'll talk about one here, a success story, where we've developed a clinical trials management application based on our blockchain platform, which is called STRATO. And one of the components there is actually a supply chain component to track supplies and consumables, from the sponsor or the CRO out to either the site or the patient. So it's an example of integrating supply chain in a pharmaceutical or healthcare environment. We'll talk more about that during the clinical trials portion. And to answer his question, yes, we're working on a daily basis with a number of larger pharmaceutical companies, because as you know, supply chain track and trace, serialization, these are all big areas that these companies are looking into, and blockchain is the perfect solution. It has the privacy and governance and all the key attributes that they're looking for, and trust is one of them. The fact, and we'll talk about that in clinical trials, the fact we want regulatory agencies to be able to trust the data, and blockchain is unique in providing that level of trust. So thank you, Marquis, for that question. I'm going to go ahead and get started on the clinical trials section. And we'll start by talking a little bit about the overall clinical trials process. At a high level, the process consists of a number of phases. So there's typically phase 1 through phase 4, and there's a gap in between each phase where, in the case in the US, the FDA does a review of the data and says, can you progress to the next step? And in general, for everyone, the earlier phases have to do with safety. Just make sure the patient, doesn't die from what you're doing. Phase 2 and phase 3 are efficacy. So you're looking at, does it work? And then you look at, does it work better than anything else that's currently on the market? If you make it to the end of phase 3, the FDA does a review and they decide whether to approve the drug. Phase 4 is after approval, where people, they track the drug over time, side effects and things like that. Something I can say is that when you read out there in the literature or whatever, the cost to take a new drug to market is close to $1 billion. I've seen a number anywhere from 400 million to 2.6 billion I actually saw. And the time frame is anywhere from 5 to 15 years. So I mentioned earlier, and you'll see these little red magnifying glasses, those indicate areas where you have to stop and wait for approval. And that period can take over 6 months. So I want to say that in developing this is an example of something, an issue or a pain point, if we can shrink that time, that review time between phases, we can really start to shrink the time to market. And we'll talk more about how we can save time, money, and eventually, it really leads to saving patient lives. So out of this general slide, the take home is that we're looking at ways to shrink this time between phases. And it really comes down to, does the FDA trust the data that was, generated to be able to move quickly, or do they have to do a lot of, verification and things like that? So the next slide, we'll talk more, we'll drill a little bit more into the clinical trial components. So I told you the overall phase process. Now, within the trial, there are a number of components, everything from study design, recruiting patients. Having the diversity is important these days. You need patients from all different types of backgrounds to make the study really random. Informed consent, huge thing. Making sure the patient has given their consent to be a part of it. And then data collection, analysis, publishing the results after approval, blah, blah, blah. Take it all the way through. And the key point here, if you look down, is we want to try to find out, why are clinical trial results invalidated? And that's both invalidating a patient or a participant, and if there's really a big problem, invalidating the whole study. And just to say, you can imagine the amount of money if it takes $1 billion to take a drug through to commercialization, that if you got through this process and it was invalidated, or if you start to invalidate patients, you could threaten the whole study. Some of the key reasons why results are invalidated is actually the identity of the patient can't be ascertained. You think people should have this straight, but you would be surprised with so many patients, and in these big drug companies, or people, whether it's a sponsor, a CRO, or whatever, people are only human. So in many cases, they have to invalidate because they don't have complete information, and it leads into poor record keeping. A lot of this is still done emailing PDFs, spreadsheets, and things like that. Important is the ability to alter the protocol of the study. Believe it or not, if people can, people go and alter the protocol, and it really changes the outcome of the clinical trial. It's a big no-no. These are things that regulatory bodies are really looking at. And chain of custody issues with patient medication supplies, making it from the manufacturer out to either the site, and we'll talk in the future, out direct to patients. So any and all of these can be reasons why during these review that people or possibly the whole study can get invalidated. Another thing is in this whole process, are there some pain points, that could be addressed with a blockchain solution? And something I've alluded to is kind of this lack of trust by regulatory agencies. If many of you have gone to seminars and things prior to the whole pandemic, which has put a lot of those on hold, the FDA and other regulatory bodies worldwide are taking a keen interest over the past 12 months in a blockchain solution. And it's because it's hard to get around it. The data is immutable. So once it's there, and you'll see that if you build in other things, there's a trust of the data. And what we're getting at, and something that can shrink this is, if they didn't have to do all these reviews and could just trust the data and that the protocol hasn't changed, we can really, streamline the process. We talked about patient recruitment and diversity requirements. It's really hard to get the right patients, to get the right information. And, this is something that's really key. Some clinical trials don't happen because they can't find enough patients that meet these criteria. Ability to track patient adherence, making sure they took the medicine correctly. If it's a medicine that has to be shipped on ice, did it make it to the site? Did the site put it in the refrigerator or whatever? Very important. And actually,
Craig, we've got another question also coming in from Steve H. I think you were going to cover this later, but Steve H specifically wants to know if you can comment on the sharing of data for research collaboration in the process of developing the vaccine for COVID-19. I think you'll mention it later, but Stephen wanted to specifically know about data sharing in this context.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit in identity management. Some key take-home word is going to be interoperability, and we're going to talk about digital or decentralized identities. It's really important that if we're going to be sharing, if it's patient data, it's really important that it's secure. And we'll talk more about a current situation where you're like, oh, what's your birth date? Or you show a driver's license and how that really doesn't work in the digital world. And yes, BlockApps is looking at a lot of what we do and analyzing the current situation and ability to share data. And, working on blockchain solutions does surround this question. So if you hang in there, we'll talk a lot more about it. It'll become clearer. And if not, in the end, we'll address it again. But it's actually a good question. And data sharing is a big deal today. We just have to make sure that that people are able to share it securely and in a private manner. And you'll find that blockchain is the perfect way to do this. And just in ending this section, that flow of funds is a big thing. In this process, believe it or not, having funds flow from the sponsor down out to the site. We'll learn a little bit more that eventually these funds can flow to the patient, that they can monetize their data and things like that. So there are a lot of pain points. And the next slide, let's talk about the components of a blockchain solution, and then we'll actually talk about a solution that we've actually developed, something that's real and you can play with yourself. So the next slide. Yes,
Craig,
yes, go ahead.
Craig, there's a question, and it's about how do you make sure that the input at the time of input, especially for data collection, how do you make sure that the bad data is taken care of, or how do you make sure the data falsification part is taken care of as part of the clinical trials?
Yeah, it all comes down to individual protocols. Someone has asked the question, well, what if everybody just adds blank pages to the blockchain? There's a certain, level of what we can control and do, but a lot of this is working, and you'll see that even our clinical trials what we've worked on is really getting the right data into the system at as early a stage as possible. So to answer the question, you do have to work internally to make sure the data that you're putting in there is correct. But once it's in there and it's validated, we want to focus on the huge benefits we'll talk about in today's environment. If you had to do a clinical trial today where the whole world's hoping that that's a cure or a vaccine for this, how, if all of this was done in the beginning, when they have to pick up things right now, how it could really make things a lot quicker. So it's a good question, but for the purposes of this presentation, there is a certain amount of responsibility to get it into the system correctly. But we want to focus on, if we have this data, it's been authenticated and verified and validated, how this helps us moving forward. So thank you so much for asking that question. I want to talk a little bit about a blockchain solution to improve outcomes in the clinical trials management arena. Again, immutability of data drives this trust. You have so many checks, QA, QC, during the phases, and then when you submit the data, they have to go back and do all this. If it were all there and it were all validated and you trust the system, there would be less review, and that's a key thing to shrinking that time between the phases. Utilize smart contracts to set and lock study protocols. Again, in a blockchain, you can't change it. And if anything, you can add something new to it, but it'll be immediately obvious to regulatory agencies. You can't get around the system, and that's one of the reasons why they love it and why we're seeing so much emphasis on blockchain-based solutions in the regulatory and compliance arena.
Great. We have a question kind of related to that topic from Ozeki. He wants to know, or they want to know, how tampering or falsification is dealt with at this level of input. He gives the example that a researcher can always choose to put bad data on the blockchain, and how that could be handled, I'm guessing.
Yes, I mean, at a research level, it is still, it's putting false data or choosing. From a standpoint of this presentation, there is a certain amount that the data, that what is needed to go through, in this case, the clinical trials process, that the data will be collected and that a complete profile will be added to the blockchain. The benefit here is to save this review time and a constant checking of data, that if you get it correctly, and it'd be a smart contract, you say this, and this must be part of this, that you can actually gather it as early as possible and make it flow through the system a lot smoother. That's really the focus for us. And once that's in there, you cannot get around or change that. Things that happened before, perhaps there are ways. I mean, I've had discussions with other people. There are things that can be done, but for the purposes of this presentation, let's focus on moving forward, how once we have this secure, private, immutable data, how this helps make the world a better place, for lack of a better explanation. Thank you so much, Caleb, for sharing that question from the attendees. It's actually a good question. And then tying into that question, creating this patient profile in this secure environment, it kind of ties into that. It improves the flow between the different activities. Just in that clinical trial process, you saw 10 or 11 discrete activities. And you can imagine that when that data is flowing between the two, if you always have to check and make sure you got the right data it's a time waster. So we feel a blockchain solution will improve that. Real-time data and tracking aspects, again, accelerate that flow of funds, make sure everything happens as quickly as possible, and address the privacy and governance components. And this is really moving forward, and we'll talk about identity management, how it ties into this, that if you allow patients to actually own their data and choose who they grant access to, whether it's part of the study or if they're monetizing their data or whatever, you'll find that this middle section, identity management, is key to, to this whole portion or this whole thing out there in the world. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and we'll have a chance to really talk about what's happening in today's world and how some of the things we're talking about fit in. But, the future in clinical trials is today with blockchain. Again, blockchain has a tokenization function. Looking forward, these functions may allow, as I said, patients to monetize their data. If you want them to be a part of a clinical trial or whatever, they can actually get paid for it. Genetic data is a key one. If you want, instead of you giving it to 23andMe to sell it, you'll be able to sell it to people. Drive continuing innovation in the overall trials process. There's a virtual clinical trial concept, and it kind of has two meanings at a high level. Direct-to-patient clinical trials. I was at a recent Scope Clinical Trials Conference, and this is a big topic. You have these sites out there where patients usually have to go in, and maybe it's a hospital or doctor's office if it's an IV, or go in to get their medication. Why not have it go direct to patient? Believe it or not, supply chain is a critical thing here. there wasn't enough trust in the system to make sure if you send the medications direct to the patient, are they going to receive it? Are they going to put it away in the fridge? Things like that. Because all of this is key in this process. You have to make sure that, as far as chain of custody requirements, but we advance continuously in the world, and supply chain of custody, is very amenable to a blockchain solution. So I think that's a very important concept, and allowing the data to be used to create patients in silico, which means kind of inside a computer. You think of a silicon chip as the heart of a computer. You have all these big data sets, and you can actually put all this data together and create this model patient, in a computer. So the future is kind of here now. There are companies working on this, big data sets, artificial intelligence and things to kind of create that model patient. In the future, maybe, you don't need people. You have this model and it exhibits the same pharmacological response that, a person would. There's new therapies out there that are very amenable to track and trace and supply chain aspects of blockchain, like CAR T cell therapy. Interesting, it's where you take a patient's blood and then you take their immune cells out and you modify them genetically, and to fight a cancer, say, that they have in their body, to recognize and to destroy that cancer. And you send the cells back to the patient and put them back in their body. It fights the cancer. In many cases, it cures it. And it's a neat concept because it's a living drug. Those cells now reproduce and in the body. So it's an example of which you'll hear this term, a living drug. You're not just, you do it when you're finished using it or excreting it. You have to take more. So neat concept, but now the patient is part of the supply chain itself. And that's a neat concept because you take their blood out, you send it to a facility, a manufacturer that does the work with it, and then it has to get back to the patient, that patient, not any patient, but it's their blood. It has to get back to them. And believe it or not, that process breaks down more than we'd like to think about. I'm going to stop right now. I know I've been doing a lot of talking. At this point, I had interjected that, maybe people have questions about how this applies to what's going on in the world.
So Craig, since you spoke about patient identity and patient recruitment as a crucial component of clinical trials, can you explain, maybe in the coming slides, how identity management is crucial to the entire play of healthcare sector if we want to revolutionize the entire healthcare sector using decentralized identity management?
Yes, I mean, and it's becoming clear, hopefully, to the audience. Identity management is a key component. Let's look at what's going on in the world today. We know with this COVID-19 pandemic going on, that there are a number of clinical trials going on, both for a vaccine and for a potential cure. And you'll note that the FDA is in a fast track mode. So what takes years, they're trying to do in a short period of time, weeks, because the whole world's counting on them. And I just want the audience to think, we talked about getting all this data as part of a blockchain and, get it right at the beginning. In many cases, they're taking old clinical trials, say for a drug that might have failed some aspect. If it's safety, that's not a good thing. But, they're picking up where people left off with clinical trials, things that may not have worked for a certain disease. They're trying to say, does it have activity for COVID-19? And there's a key point there that if these clinical trials, if it were a blockchain type platform with the data, you could go into it, and if you trust the data, you could probably continue on with that trial, uninterrupted. The way it is today, you're going back, this may have occurred 5 or 10 years ago, you got to go back and kind of reanalyze things, look at it, do I trust it, and things like that. So, just in today's environment, to get things moving quickly, because what people are doing is taking every approved drug or clinical trials that were in various stages, and perhaps they, cut off because it wasn't working for a particular disease state, and they're trying to say, are any of these a cure? In other words, they're trying to kind of start midway instead of having to go back to scratch and try to determine the activity. So I see as blockchain solutions are adopted, I see a huge benefit in the clinical trials for, when these type of pandemics occur again, which it's inevitable. We've had SARS and all the type of stuff. It's inevitable it'll happen again. I mean, that's just kind of one example, but it is key that, and to answer the question, identity management is key. If you're going to, trust this data and all, did it come actually from the person that it's claiming it's from? And if you're going to monetize data, or patients are going to share their data, say even interoperability is going to be a big concept in about 10 minutes in talking. You know, if a patient wants to grant access to their data, you know, their identity is important. And in many cases in a digital world, they're not there to take their driver's license out of their wallet to show. So we have to have a robust system to say, I am who I am, or for them to say that person is who they say they are, but they're not sitting in front of you. And hint, hint, telemedicine big today, you know, it's key to unlocking that, especially in today's environment, something that was done by the Trump administration, so that now, you know, with this pandemic out here, you don't have to go to the doctor and risk being exposed. Telemedicine over the past few weeks since it was passed has exploded in popularity thanks to, you know, a lifting or easing of regulation. So I'll stop there. Were there any other questions? Because I do want to keep us moving forward.
Yeah, so there's one question from Ashok, and he wants to know that, can blockchain reduce the number of years in drug approval process? And is there any specific scenario which you can quote or maybe talk about?
I mean, as far as a specific example, you know, we'll talk. We have a solution out there, and our solution is basically the first blockchain-based solution. So we're looking forward, and we'll talk about this in just a second. You know, that this is the future, and as people start to utilize the solution, get the data right in the beginning, if there's, you know, future drugs will benefit from this. And if there's ever what's going on in the world today, hopefully if they have to pick up, you know, and try to find a cure or a vaccine, that it will be a lot easier to pick up where people left off, or to, you know, to get that out there. I mean, again, we kind of talked here, you know, we're shrinking the time between phases. Blockchain's immutability helps with that, and this whole data, you know, the whole concept of having the right data there. But yeah, I think it'll become evident in the next section. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what we've done, then we'll go into identity management. You'll see how it applies, and moving forward, you know, as we go through medical credentialing, everybody will be thinking, well, you'll understand how it applies there. So thank you so much for that question. What I'm going to go ahead and move forward, because I want to keep us, because I think you know, there are a lot of concepts here that are important. And I just wanted to talk, you know, here at BlockApps, we've actually worked with a third party who actually developed an app, a clinical trials management software app, on top of our blockchain-based Strato platform. And again, this is available to clinical research organizations, trial sponsors. You know, it manages data collection efforts, including, you know, digital health records. We were talking about that, getting the right data, you know, the first time, that earlier part of that process. Informed consent. You wouldn't believe how many times a patient is invalidated because they didn't give their permission, or that form was sitting in someone's email box, and, you know, and it just got lost and, you know, never made it there. So very important. Supply chain and accounting functions are in here, because those types of things are very amenable, you know, to blockchain methodologies. US HIPAA, GDPR compatible. It's a modular design, and I know you can't really see a lot on the screen. It's just meant for illustrative purposes. You know, it's going to have a GUI front end, and, you know, supply chain accounting functions are built into it. You know, utilize the strengths of a blockchain platform, things like privacy, governance, you know, who can have access to it, consensus, system performance, because it's a private permission network. And I want to mention, you know, it's the first really app of its kind that's blockchain based. Doesn't mean other people aren't working on it, but, you know, it's one of the early, we're the earliest adopter of this type of methodology. And it's one of those things, when you're first out there, you have a chance to kind of set industry standards. So, you know, we're working with, you know, CROs and the like to make sure that it helps them and it helps speed the process. You know, for example, we're founding members of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which is an organization that sets blockchain, Ethereum-based blockchain standards. You start to put this all together, and we can be, you know, we can take this out there and really develop and set the standards for the industry. Just wanted to mention, if anyone here is interested in a product demo of this product, you know, you can visit BlockApps /healthcare, click on Ask an Expert or whatever. It sends an email to me. Also, you can ask your Rejolut representative. They'd be glad to, you know, put us all in contact, and we'd love to show you our vision of the future. I'm going to stop here for a second, and we're going to move into a key portion. It's in the middle of the presentation, and you'll agree that it has a lot of implications back to clinical trials, which become evident, and moving into medical credentialing. So I'll stop for a second. Are there any other quick questions so we can get into this?
Yeah, Craig, there's one question from John. He wants to know if people who want to participate in clinical trials, can their remuneration be integrated into a blockchain-based solution? Something which can be linked to their identity?
Yes, I mean, that's kind of the overriding factor in all of this, to make things easier. If they have a packet, if we can truly trust the data, it would make it a lot easier for them to be part of the clinical trials process. And, you know, the added benefit, you know, is the tokenization or monetization possibilities for this data. You know, right out there, a lot of companies out there that have these databases full of thousands of people that potentially are clinical trial, you know, people that could be a part of the trial. But one of the big things is trusting the data out there. We all know we subscribe to databases. Who's keeping it updated? You know, is the patient dead already? If they, you know, come up with some other disease that would invalidate their use there, you end up, they're part of a database, but you still have to do all this type of, you know, work in validating it. The hope is that blockchain offers a clean alternative that once it's validated and verified, that it can, you know, if the patient has the right requirements, it can flow directly. Just, you know, we saw yesterday Johnson & Johnson, one of their subs, you know, was awarded a clinical trial for a vaccine for COVID-19. And they say, oh, it's going to start in September. Well, geez, I might be dead by then. Why do they need that much time? And maybe it's to synthesize the vaccine, the components themselves. A lot of it is getting the right patient, you know, selecting the right patients for the trial. It's critical, and that takes time because, you know, in this case, the whole world's hoping that they don't screw up or somebody doesn't forget to collect some form. So, you know, you see things in the news and start thinking about how, you know, a blockchain solution could, or why it's taken so long. And if they did it differently, you know, the result would be a lot quicker, and hopefully we would get to a cure quicker or a vaccine. So I'm going to move on into the next section because I do want to keep us on time and make sure we have a chance to understand how, you know, this concept right now, identity management, plays into both other topics we're talking about. I did this section a little differently, kind of question answer, just to break things up and to understand that this is a key component of these other two areas we're speaking about. So, you know, what's identity management? It's really, you know, all the processes and things an organization uses to identify, authenticate, and authorize access to their systems or systems, you know, external systems and services. And it's always been said, just as a little gee whiz type thing, you know, everybody has some form of identity, right? Because otherwise, you know, how could you prove your existence? And it's really not the case. You know, if you look in the world, you know, these are some World Bank statistics. You know, I mean, 1 billion people actually don't have an official proof of identity, a birth certificate or driver's license, something that would say who they are is who they are. 1 in 2 women in low-income countries don't even have an ID. And these things can really limit people's access to services and things like that. Some people don't want to be known because they don't want the tax authority or whatever to come after them. But it's beside the point. I mean, it's important to know that, you know, a lot of countries, 161, you know, have ID systems that are based on digital technologies. So in order for, you know, if we need a vaccine or a cure or access to healthcare or whatever, we need to find these people. We need to give them some form of identity that'll work in this digital world today. Identity management, and we'll get into some more esoteric concepts in a second, but just to let you know, right now the current situation is the biggest way we do it is a username and password right now. Imagine in your daily lives, you know, and one of the drawbacks there is that this information is included, typically it's ripe for fraud or, you know, or hacking, because the information is usually on a centralized server or computer. Think of these medical wearable devices that we all have. Think of the amount of patient-specific sensitive data they collect. Do you really know where it's ending up? You know, some little company, 2 people that does this, and they say, yeah, this is how we're going to treat your data, but they get bought out, they go out of business, blah, blah, blah. All this data is up on the cloud. Who knows where? Do we really know what's happening to that patient-specific data. And finally, governments are the biggest offenders. They have driver's license systems, birth certificates not control. These systems rarely communicate with each other. So there's a lot of opportunity to do a better job as far as identity management goes. And the big thing is, I alluded to this before, is in a digital world, you may not be there right across to show them something. And if you email them a copy of it, how do they know, or whatever, how do they know, how can they trust and validate that without, calling the originator of the document who generated the document? So in the digital world, we have to have a good way to say, yes, we trust this information. It's been validated, authenticated. So even though, the person's not standing there, you can trust this data. And that's really, tie into digital identity. In a blockchain solution, digital identities are made up not only of, the personal information we talked about, birth certificates, driver's license, but it looks at information from you that's going on in the web, personal information from the web, your web activities. These digital identities arise through the creation of decentralized identities. It's another concept that's important. And something, we'll get into some examples, but these are cryptographically secure identities. So there's an authentication function that occurs in this, and the encryption functions are via a series of paired keys. There's going to be a public key and a private key, and these two, when they marry, it says, hey, the private key is owned by the originator of the document. When that public key finds it and they authenticate, they say, yes, that document is from the person we thought it was from. And just to let you know, if you think about it now, instead of your data sitting in your physical wallet in your back, this is out there. It's decentralized. It's all over the web. They have all these elements. And so, we'll talk about some systems where we go out there and we look at these elements, and they all point back to, in this case, if I'm the one we're trying to verify, to me. So if all those pieces are pointing back to me, then people can be sure that what was submitted has come from me. And that's kind of the basis. At a very high level, we could spend weeks going through in more detail, but at a high level, we need to be able to authenticate data and things like that may not be coming from a person standing in front of us. I tried to use this as just a basic example. The concept of digital signatures. We may be familiar with that. You have someone that creates or signs a digital document electronically. In a blockchain-based world or whatever, these keys are created. So the person that creates it has this private key only to them. The algorithm creates a hash that's associated with these keys. So it goes over to who they sent it to, and that person gets this and says, this electronic signature, is it from who I thought it was? The private key the person holds, the public key is out there, on the web potentially, and the two find each other. And, each one is only able to encrypt, decrypt each other and the message. So when it finds it, it works out, it's identical. It says, hey, the person that sent this is the person we think it is. That's a very general example, but it's kind of indicative of what's going on. Here at BlockApps, we similar in today's environment. Our approach to identity. If we're working with companies that have a bunch of legacy systems and all these different sign-ons, to keep track of it, we actually try to consolidate it, into a single sign-on concept to make sure that we're integrating there. It's steps moving towards these true decentralized or digital identities. I'll say, and then in this section, we'll give you an idea of how it's applicable. But we asked the question, why is this important in healthcare? Think about it. These decentralized identities have a lot of privacy and security concerns. That they address a lot of these concerns that patients have had in the past. Key word that has to come out of this presentation, a take-home word, is interoperability. You'll hear this a lot. And this has to do with patients being able to provide seamless or access to their own data. Think of hospital systems. They're all different computer systems. If you want to, you need to go to the doctor, or you think you have COVID-19, those systems don't talk to each other, in the future with interoperability. And there's been a law in the US that has been passed to allow, to say this has to happen more, where you can't have everybody with their own system. this is an easy way to control access to your health data across multiple platforms. So interoperability is key. An example of how it benefits is telemedicine. I've been alluding to this all along, but in today's crisis, you may not want to go into the doctor, or for whatever reason. Obviously, you may not want to catch the disease, but that doctor's on video with you. How does he know you are who you are? If you're in person, they ask your birth date or whatever from their computer. Who knows? Can you trust that? Here's a way that if you're not in front of them, if you have this decentralized ID that's very private, very secure, has elements all out there, not just what's in your wallet, and is very secure, cryptographically protected, that says, hey, you are who you say you are. It helps out tremendously if, in this situation, it really helps the doctor to say, okay, this is the correct patient, and to provide the medical care in an expeditious manner or expeditious manner. And just some gee whiz stuff, and then I promise I'll stop for questions. Continue work in this area is focused on the following: self-sovereign identity, which is a neat thing. You have a device, and that you had all these things out on the web, so you get identified. It looks out there, and if all those things point back to the device, that piece of information has been validated and authenticated. And just as a little ahead, when we get to medical credentialing, that device now has all this validated data. It doesn't have to be validated again. So you as a person collect all this validated data on your mobile device. You don't need a government. That's why it says self-sovereign. You're your own government. You're your own issuer of this data. It's a neat concept, and it ties in, and it's really the future. And I talked already about monetization is really important, and why this digital identity, why this is important, and data portability. We'll talk about, you guys in Europe, your Data Portability Act and things like that really help the movement of data across platforms. I'm going to move to this. I'm going to leave it at medical. Are there any questions on the previous part? You should see how this applies into clinical trials and, getting that information into correct and being able to share it with medical facilities. And
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop. You guys, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Craig. So there's a question from Howard. He wants to know how IE management, especially in the case of, let's say, GDPR, how data anonymization can be done, given the fact that blockchains immutability aspect of the data.
Yeah, I think it's really a trust issue. Again, I'm familiar with the concept. I follow these, and at a high level for this presentation, I want to keep it at that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the things like immutability go in, and digital identity go into saying if you're going to move, it gives the patient control over the data. Right now, the patient really doesn't have control over who accesses their data, and these organizations out there can't really trust. They're on a computer and that person's submitting data. Do you know that's really the person, or can they trust the data that's coming in? And just at a very high level, this blockchain solution addresses that and helps to make sure that the patient has control over access, or who they grant access to the data. Because right now, there's a lot of data out there, and it's questionable, where it ends up and who has control over it. That's the overriding thing there. Any other questions? Because I do want to move on into credentialing.
Yeah. So in fact, Howard has another maybe sub-question. He wants to know how anonymization of data itself create patterns, right, which can be identified, even the hashes. So how that is taken care of to be, let's say, a GDPR compliant platform.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to get into the specifics, it may be a topic that's outside of the realm of this presentation. In order to get through the whole presentation, my suggestion is the person that asked that question, if afterwards you contact the moderator or go to the Ask an Expert on BlockApps, click on it, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to set aside a time to really go through that and to answer your question. But for the basis of what we're doing here, I do want to give the complete story because it's so applicable to what we deal with in the world today and what we want to do in the future. Thank you so much for asking the question. I'm going to move on because I want to get through this section, and then in the end, there'll still be some more time for questions. But we've talked about these other things. Remember digital identity. Let's talk about medical credentialing. And I think the quiz or the thing for everyone in the audience, start thinking about how this concept of digital identity would apply here. I think you can probably see some obvious parallels, and you'll know the answers to the questions before I even present them. But currently a doctor, the credentialing process, it's an onerous process that healthcare professionals, and this is everything from doctors, nurses, physical therapists, it's not just physicians. A lot of people go through this, to gather their educational and professional qualifications, and as they move through the healthcare system, they're continually having to present their credentials for validation. None of us want, a quack operating on us because he said he was a doctor and he's not. So it's one of these things where we feel that there's a blockchain solution that can help out. But another thing to mention is that in the US, the licensing process is typically individual by states, and that ties in with this. It can limit mobility of doctors and nurses in times like today where they're like, oh, we need doctors, nurses. The point I'm getting at with all of this is you can see right now the current process requires all this validation numerous times, and it takes a long time. And so if you need doctors right away, they can't really, get in there and practice and see patients right away until things have been authorized, until their credentials have been validated and authenticated. One thing to note is that you'll see from this diagram there, everything is pretty interconnected in the credentialing industry. So in a way, I think a blockchain solution is very amenable here. And I had mentioned at the beginning of this, I want everybody to think, we've learned about identity management, how that's going to help in this case. The next slide is the current process. We alluded to it a little bit in the previous slide. They submit all this information, and then someone either physically, if it's a transcript, they got to contact the university or visit the website. If it's a licensing, if it's a pharmacist, you got to call go look on the California Board of Pharmacy website or call them up to verify it's active and valid, and blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of work. There's some organizations out there that have non-blockchain solutions that purport to do this in a quicker manner, but it's still a very manual process. Some people have some software packages that maybe help cut a few days. I'll mention here, we'll give you more detail. It takes about 4 months, 120 days for a doctor if he wants to move for all his credentials to be validated. These are things for him to be able to practice there. If he wants to accept insurance from his patients, the insurance company needs to know. And just a little aside, a neat thing is, think about that provider directory we all used to get, in print form. When a doctor's change or added or deleted from an insurance plan, keeping that updated. Payers, insurers spend about $2 billion a year just keeping that database up to date. And I think a blockchain solution would help, in that aspect tremendously, because you'll see we can shrink things down and hit digital identity. You don't have to go through this once it's been validated. If it's sitting in your, your wallet or whatever, your digital wallet, it just goes out there. You don't have to go through this just to get to the last page of the story. Cost, flexibility, the cost of this type of process, again, about $7,500 a day for a physician, if they're not in front of patients while they're waiting for this to happen. $2 billion a year, we talked about databases, just keeping who's a provider and letting people know. There's a lot of opportunity for a blockchain solution here. And what you'll see is we've kind of, and Caleb Ferguson, who's actually one of the moderators behind the scenes here, did a deep dive into this medical credentialing, as a use case. And, we looked at how we could take our Strato blockchain platform, and provide a solution here. So again, there's a lot more detail to this. Caleb did an excellent job. I can't present all of that to you here, but just so some things will be at a higher level. But, we want to look at this, and if you look at the graph, on the left side you see standard-oriented blockchains. That's like a person in the middle looking to their university, their transcript, continuing education, things like that. That say a medical professional picks up, if you created this linear blockchain and you started adding it, sometimes it can get unwieldy. So it may not, and then you're going to add, they also need from the other side, insurers need access to this to be able to say, okay, you can request payment on behalf of your patients and things like that. Hospitals to verify you can practice medicine. To kind of shrink this, you have the one side, which it's you're bringing in all the things you've done historically as your credential package to be used on the other side, which are patient-focused blockchains. And you're talking about hospitals, insurers, or the three Ps, patient, providers, things like that. So what we say is, in the middle, kind of the doctor or the worker is kind of the bridge here. So we've thrown, the provider, which in this case you could say, oh, it's the physician or whatever. We've thrown them in the middle of the mix. And so they're going to be the link between the two. And we think the identity management concepts, and the key interoperability concepts, because it's very hard for these hospitals, insurers to communicate directly with, on the other side, these universities, licensure agencies, government, both government and private and things like that. So just to give I'll give you a little more detail as to how it happens, but we've kind of put our blockchain system in the middle to kind of facilitate the flow and to make this credentialing process seamless. This is actually the last slide, and this is kind of the crux of it. And what you'll see there is, this provider, they create a digital wallet that's based on our blockchain platform. So at a high level, what happens is their transcript and things like that, once these things are validated the first time, okay, and in a blockchain system that's immutable, it's done. If you think of digital and decentralized identities, think of that in the aspect of this wallet. Once you verify the transcript, it flows to your wallet, whether it's your portable device or whatever, and it's there. It becomes part of your digital identity, or whatever. It's out on the web. So when other people need access to it, you don't have to go back to the university and redo the thing. It's out there, it's validated in our system, it's trustworthy, so immediately approved or authenticated, and the people can accept it. And that's really the premise here. So on the back side, this provider, this person in the middle that's using our platform, collects all of this data throughout their lives that is validated and authenticated as part of their digital identity. You don't have to be there in person where they give you the transcript or they send it by, it's a way that this person can say, yes, this data has been validated, and in the system, other people that ask for it or need it can grab it immediately and immediately use it and not have to go through the authentication. So it works on that side. And then when that person wants to go to a different hospital, wants to work at a different hospital, or there's a pandemic and people are like, oh, we need doctors here in New York, that person shows up and has this, as part of their digital identity, and at a simple level, they can get credentialed almost, virtually instantaneously. All of that stuff is there, validated, authenticated. It flows to them. They can go out there in the field, practice medicine, save lives, and in the end, this is a better system for everyone. Because right now the governments have to pass a law and say, we're going to overlook the credentialing process. That's not a good thing. After it's over, that costs a lot of people money, and that's not what you want as a patient. Yeah, you may be sick, you may be in the middle of a pandemic, but do you want to know that that person is really, qualified to do what they're doing to you. I'm going to stop now because at this point, that's kind of the end of my presentation. I mean, again, the take home is to take clinical trials and medical credentialing. We looked at digital identity management in the middle. It helps with patient data, collecting it, and them granting access. And we see that also on the medical credentialing side. And the key concept is interoperability, which allows the data to flow between different platforms. And overriding is the patient to control access to their data, to actually have control over their access. And again, it's worth mentioning, we have a wealth of information on our website, blockapps.net healthcare. Feel free to visit over there. And I'm going to stop and see if anyone has any questions. I'll leave it to the moderators to tell us how much time is left. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us. We're here to help. And let me know if there are any questions right now. I'll stop.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Craig, for your input. I will pick one last question from Caesar. So Caesar wants to know whether the outside entities, like say government agencies or hospitals, do they need to be on the blockchain network, or can they be outside the network?
Typically, we would want to put them on the network, but it's not difficult to get them as part of the network. It's one of those types of things that it's kind of a complicated. It seems like an easy question, but a complicated answer to it. But the answer is no. I mean, we can integrate them into the system, and you form a network, this decentralized network, that in this case makes it easier for the data to flow between members in this decentralized network. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? How much time do we have left? Are we right at an hour?
We have just clocked 1 hour.
Okay.
And thanks to you for pulling this in time, and I appreciate your inputs and perspective on clinical trials, identity management and credentialing as well. I hope that audience will find this webinar useful, and we have some exciting webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be talking about blockchain carbon credit marketplaces with John Chappell. So do sign up for the webinar, and we will look forward to your feedback and suggestions how we can make it better and more relevant for you. Thank you everyone for joining in, and we'll look forward for you guys to join the next webinar.
Okay, and thanks again to everyone. Remember, myself and our partners at Rejolut, we're just a click away. Specific questions, don't be afraid to ask us. Everyone, stay safe, have a pleasant rest of your day, and we look forward to you joining our next webinar in this series. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.